One of the first major film scores I conducted was the movie Seven, music by Howard Shore with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. I conducted the score for As Good as It Gets, which was up for an Academy Award by Hans Zimmer. And one of my favorite scores by James Newton Howard was The Village, the music for the film by M. Night Shyamalan. Hilary Hahn was the soloist, and James recognized that they needed a conductor who could work with a soloist of her caliber and also coordinate, knowing the technology of syncing the music to the film. So that was an extraordinary collaboration and one of my favorite film scores. And it was also up for an Oscar. There's always a time constraint. If I'm conducting, then it means that the composer is able to be in the booth listening. I'm there to serve and to facilitate with expediency the recording. After meeting with the composer, and hearing the mock-up, I know better what it is that they're trying to convey. So if I hear things that are counterintuitive to what is on the page and what they want for the scene, I'm able to make suggestions, but I also have to temper that because I'm not completely in control of the moment. I can't say, okay, this is my gig, and now the flutes and the oboes and I can't do that because thousands of dollars are ticking away every minute. So it's learning to be very judicious about and concise with direction. And everybody, when you're recording, they're all at the top of their game. I mean, it's the musicians that come for these recording sessions are extraordinary. They're reading it down. It sounds like it's the final take. They're so good. So we all have to be on that level right away. I did a recording once, was called in very last minute to do a recording of Breakdown, the movie called Breakdown, with a score by Basil Polidoris. And unfortunately, he was very ill that last day of recording, and I got a call very last minute. Lucas, can you be at the studio at 9 o'clock? We've got a 10 o'clock session, and the music will be there. Okay, sure. So we get there, and I get there at 9, and the music's not there. 10 o'clock session begins. The first cue up is a 6.5 minute chase scene with multimeters, and it's very, very complicated. So I turned through the pages real quick, and then, okay, let's go. we read through the whole piece, and they said in the booth, okay, Lucas, come in and let's take a listen. I walked into the booth, and the sound engineer said, dude, how'd you do that? So you learn a certain amount of efficiency. And I will say that has come to me by being an assistant conductor, because assistant conductors invariably need to prepare full programs with very, very little rehearsal.
Do you ever feel that because of the pressures when you're doing a movie production, that you're sacrificing something musically?
It's not for me to determine at that point, because the composer has the final say. And when the composer says, we're moving on, it is the composer's call. There's a certain amount of music that they need to cover hourly. Otherwise, they're going to run out of time, and they're going to go to overtime, and it's more expensive. So it's really not my call at that point. I might say, you know what, I think we can do a better take, and that happens, and if there's time, then we'll do another take, and hopefully we get better the very last time. One of the first that I mentioned, the movie Seven, and this was really a kind of extraordinary collaboration, because Howard Shore was still writing the score while we were recording. New Line was still editing the footage, and so they didn't have a lock on how long each sequence was. So Howard had written these sequences that were vaguely what they needed instead of being absolute. And what ended up happening was that, and I said, do you want me to try to match anything on the screen? He said, no, just go. So it was actually an extraordinary thing because I felt like I was free conducting to a ballet on the screen. And no take was the same in terms of the timing. I mean, there were a few places where we were in sync with the click track, but most of the score was actually pretty amorphous, and it was fascinating because it just normally doesn't happen that way.
Do you know if they'll tweak the recording after it's done regarding tempos in order to make it fit the scene a little bit more precisely?
There are times that will happen, certainly. With technology now, you can you speed things up slightly without changing the pitch. And if they needed to take 2 frames out or 10 frames out of a scene or add something back in, absolutely. And also because the standard is that the composers are pretty much always required to create a mock-up of the full score before you get to the recording stage. So the director is hearing a synthesized recording of the whole score. And sometimes the director kind of falls in love with the mock-up. And there are times where the mock-up is used interchangeably with what has been recorded by the musicians. So once you're using a mock-up, you can manipulate that in any kind of fashion you like. I've written 2 film scores myself and music for TV, chamber music, lots of chamber music, and musical theater. So I've written it for just about every medium.
I think once I became a composer for film and television, I had the opportunity to collaborate with Tyler Bates, who was a bit older than me. And he showed me a lot about kind of the process and how to work with clients. Really, the difference between the arts and the applied arts, even though you're putting your heart and soul and passion into something, when it's for a film or television project, you're following somebody else's lead, and you need to not just sort of like lay down and say, yes, you want to go left, I'll go left. You want to go right, I'll go right. You have to also find ways to stay inspired and come up with creative ways to, even if it wasn't the direction you wanted to go in that direction. And so I think that was very helpful in my path.
How did you get into movies and television writing?
It was a series of different things. It wasn't necessarily that I knew somebody. No, I think I could point to like 3 or 4 different nodes. First thing was, that band of mine, we were on the road. We had come back into the studio to work on our 3rd record. We were with Atlantic Records. Atlantic Records said, there's somebody making a movie who needs an end title sequence. They brought the movie in. We worked to picture. I was like, wow, this is really fun. Like, we're sort of painting with music to picture in time, like in a timeline. This is like really creative and collaborative and storytelling. Going back to my upbringing, like my used to sit with me and like play me like Peter and the Wolf and point out the themes of the different. Suddenly I was like, oh, this is that. But here we are, like in a modern way, and it's fun. And then, and the technical side of it's kind of fun too. I was intrigued by that. So yes, I knew someone. I went to high school with a guy who was doing an independent film. He had like no money for it. It was called The Definite Maybe, ironically. We did that, my friend Sam Sokolo's movie. And that was kind of my first chance to do something. Not much happened with that movie. And then I moved to LA to try to make stuff happen in film and TV because I thought, well, there's more work out there for it. This was probably in the late 90s, 1997, 98. And then at that point, I was just sending music blind into different studios, and nobody would really pay me any mind. But I got a call on a Friday night from this guy, David Grossman, who was running the television music at Paramount. And he said, hey, there's an opportunity if you want on spec to write a theme song for a sitcom. If you write it tonight, do tomorrow. So no money, give it a whirl. So he gave me the brief with what they're looking for. I wrote this thing. He calls me the next day. He's like, okay, so they love it. They're not going to use it, but the head of the show would like it if you come to his house to write something with him. So I was like, okay. So this guy, Jonathan Katz, he actually had a show called Dr. Katz, where it was sort of like he was like a shrink, and comedians would come in, and it was sort of animated. Anyway, I go to his house. We write a song or two, like 20-second sort of goofy songs. Sunday, I get a call, or no, Monday. They're like, they loved it. They're not going to use it. The star of the show was Bob Saget. He had some friends who were going to do the theme song. Have you ever considered doing the music for a show? And I was like, we'd love to. And so that was my first gig. And from there, it was a series of things like, well, somebody knew me from that, and they allowed me to throw my hat in the ring for a bake-off for another show. And it was that kind of thing. And, I would do these bake-offs, where me and other composers would compete, score like 3 scenes or something like that. And I'd say, like, if I did 30 of them, 2 of them, that was enough in each case to like go to the next thing. Probably like 100. Yeah, I've just been cranking them out between the films and TV shows. Yeah, and it's a lot of fun, but again, it's the applied arts. Sometimes it can be constraining.
Do you have a favorite contemporary composer yourself, movies or otherwise? Or
in terms of the film and TV composer, there are quite a few doing good things. Alexandre Desplat, he does some great stuff. I like Michael Dana's scores. There's something about John Williams, like, does arguably the most iconic stuff we've heard, and maybe is the most adept. Like he has incredible skills. A lot of his themes, I feel like they're kind of lifted from things you've heard. They're incredibly creative. But some of the themes are like, one of them's like lifted right out of Firebird Suite. I mean, to me, I'm like, well, look, I'm not saying it's plagiarism. I'm not saying it. There's stuff that's very reminiscent of something. But that's the world we operate in. You know what I mean? There's only so many notes. There's only so many permutations and combinations.
Right.
So to me, I hear that, I'm like, oh, that makes sense that it's the love theme, and this is the princess thing from Firebird Suite. That intellectually, I'm like, I know why you would sort of use that as your jumping off point.
right.
And similarly, like some of the kind of, it's heroic. And at this point, it's like, we all just, when we hear da-da-da, like, that's heroic. But is it derivative? Ride of the Valkyries or whatever? We're working in a tradition. There's some vernacular, you're lifting here and there and moving it around. And I think the same thing with contemporary film, TV stuff. I hear a lot of the same sound being recycled, and I'm not really mad at it. I'm like, yeah, it's a wink and a nod to this one or that one. In terms of what I know is happening behind the scenes, in terms of like how sausage is made, I know often a director or the showrunner got attached to a piece of music that was in the temp and fell in love with it, and the composer was up against having to replace it. And in some cases, it's like, they're like, we really love this one sound. So you're like, all right, there's their sound, melodically too. It's certain intervals create certain emotions. You know what I mean? Like when you're looking at people who are having a romantic thing, it's like, there are progressions that give you that. If it's an action thing, there are, ways to use, odd meters or tempos to sort of keep people on edge. And, there's little techniques that are just like, here's one of 3 or 4 ways to do it, and they work.
I noticed that you've done a lot of arranging, maybe composing for movies, TVs.
Yeah, mainly arranging these days. It's a lot easier than composing.
So how exactly does that work? Like, does somebody compose a few lines and you take it from there, or how does that work?
I would compare it to, let's say you've got a theatre script, a play or a film script, and there's many different ways of creating that, turning it into a film. You give it a different director, different actors, etc. But like overall, it's, you'll be able to tell it's the same thing by looking at different versions. And arranging's a bit like that, I think. So you have to have a degree of faithfulness to the original music, and then depending on the context, know how far you can sort of change that.
So somebody may have written the entire score and you go from that?
You're mainly adding strings and things or orchestrate it. It's a bit like orchestration, I guess, but maybe changing the harmony sometimes depending on the context. I'm quite conservative, so I generally don't change harmonies too much.
Have you ever had to conduct or be in the actual development of the soundtrack with the movie up on the screen? And
Yeah, I've conducted, but it's not something I don't think it's a good idea for me to conduct my own arrangements, because I'm sort of concentrating on not messing up rather than listening to, the individual, the violas, see if it's a lot easier with commercial music to conduct because you've got a click track, you're wearing headphones, so no one's going to get lost. There's a screen with the bar number on, etc., etc. But I normally have other people do that these days. But if there's if I have to do it, I'll do it. But only if I have to. I haven't studied conducting, but I'm giving comments in the studio remotely to the players, so I'm still giving feedback just via the conductor. So I'll tell the conductor, that bar was bad or something, then he'll convey that to the players.
overall, do you enjoy that process?
Less so recently. It's very, very stressful because a lot of money has been spent on these recording sessions. So what I tend to enjoy more these days is editing the recordings afterwards, where, there's no time pressure and you can listen to every take and choose the best one. And that's what I'm enjoying quite a lot. When it's when there's a lot of time, then it's more enjoyable. But when you've only got not very long, it's very stressful, because because the price of a mistake is quite high in time wise. A mistake, but a mistake by me, not by them. Like if I've made a mistake and in the score or something like that. I mean, I mainly record in Eastern Europe, so in Budapest, where the money is less than it would be in the UK or America, but it's still a lot of money, if that makes sense. Yeah, so the players are just incredible there. The setup, I mainly work with a company called Budapest Scoring, and they do the sessions remotely over Zoom. So they live stream the the audio, so you can hear the conductor recording the music, and then you talk to the conductor over Zoom about the bits you want redone. And they had this all set up before the pandemic, and then when the pandemic happened, this sort of turbocharged their business, because suddenly remote recordings were the only way you could actually do it, and they're really huge now. They bought their own studio, their own concert hall and things.
Yeah, I've done entire films, but I wouldn't call those longer pieces. That's just a collection of 8-second to 2-minute pieces
that are used repetitively throughout.
No, there's just like you'll get a movie in and maybe you'll do like 50 some sound cues during it, but they're all small. I don't really listen to many soundtracks. I mean, I enjoy the work of like all the big guys working today. But yeah, no, I really don't listen too much. I mean, unless I'm doing research, if I get a project and then, I'll go off on 8 hours of just consuming everything that I can from that genre. But I mean, that's more work. That's not listening to it for fun. When you get a scene that is the right length, where everything turns about where it should turn, you can absolutely put beautiful structure into those things.
But like,
but yeah, you don't get that all the time.
For example, there aren't statements of the melody and then development of the melody and then recapitulation.
So if you're trying to do like a sonata form kind of thing, which works all the time everywhere, so why not? It's almost never going to line up perfectly with the edit they have. Sometimes people will edit to your music, but then they'll chop your music into smaller parts and then it'll destroy the recapitulation and stuff like that.
Right, and it hacks the music apart.
Yeah.
I mean,
would it make the movie more satisfying to have the music have that much structure? I get a lot of emails requesting, it's like, they'll say, oh, I have this sort of video. What track do you recommend for it? And I'm like, I need to know a lot more than just what the scene is about. I need to know how fast are the cuts? How fast is the talking? Is there, you know, like to really match music to a thing, you can't just say, oh, here's a happy piece, go.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think it's like, oh yeah, I just need this, but happier. It's like, no, that's not what's failing here. like the pace of the music is faster than your actors, and that's causing some cognitive dissonance, and we need to match the pace of them if they're the people we want to pay attention to. If we want to pay attention to the crowd over here, we need to match that pace. And so you can use the music to draw attention around in a scene. So it really is like a combined art. It's not there is music and then there is video. Yes, I'm going to the video. Copyrights are so bizarre. Like the movie It's a Wonderful Life is in the public domain, but the soundtrack to It's a Wonderful Life is not.
Oh.
They bothered to copyright the soundtrack, but then they didn't renew the copyright on the original film or something like that. And there's too much culture tied up in rights, which is why I'm just trying to get rid of that. Just everything public domain, go. Use it for everything you want. Build on it. We're moving a lot faster than we did, you know, hundreds of years ago. When did copyright start? Hundreds of years ago.
Right.
And so we're moving so much faster, and yet copyrights stay there so much longer, and it makes it very hard to build a culture.
I orchestrate these movies for Hollywood, and I'll work with these guys. So I just did this new movie, German movie, and they asked me to write a whole bunch of music in the style of John Adams, Harmony Lyric. Yeah. And so I listened to Harmony Lyric, and it was, you know, I always liked that piece, actually. That was always, I enjoyed it. I'm like, well, how am I going to make this myself? And I had to write a whole bunch of music in the style of like a few, like 10 bars here, 20 bars here, and then I would expand and make like a 5-minute piece and that, but with my own thing. And actually, we just recorded it in the summer, and it was, and even the conductor said, this is better than Harmony Lyric. This is much more interesting, but still had that, what they wanted to hear. What I did, and then they would put some electronics and do some movie stuff over it, whatever. And all of a sudden, it's kind of a brand new thing. And it was, first it was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And then I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I really, you know, I like it.
So,
and people like this, other people. So that's good.
That particular piece of music you did write in a minimalist style?
Yeah, like, but not just minimalist style as inspired by Harmony Lyric. So like very specific, but not too specific that, you know, people will recognize. So it's kind of a tricky thingy, you know.
So did you do the repetitive notes and
Right.
drones and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, of course, all of that stuff. But you know, changing the harmonies and the textures and a lot of things around it are not in the piece, perhaps, but sound that they could have been in the piece if you wrote it. You know, this type of thing. And it's that. So for me, when I have to do stuff like that, it's a challenge, and I'm always looking from piece to piece, what's the next challenge? You know, because so I have 927 pieces of music. And you know, it's hard to find the next challenge, but I always somehow next one I'm like, oh yeah, this I haven't really, let me explore this. You know?
So when you wrote that piece of music, you knew the script before you wrote it, or did you write it and they excerpted?
I did know some of the script. I mean, they did send it to me, though I didn't have so much time to read it all. And it's an interesting movie that's coming out, but I don't really write movie music, so and script and that whole thing. That's not really the guys I work with, the composers I work with, they're very good at that. But I'm really just the orchestrator, and I orchestrate their music. And sometimes they will ask me to do some extra where they can't write this type of like maybe minimalistic thing, and I will write an orchestra piece. But I'm not a movie composer at all. I always tell people that that's for me, music is always first, and to create art to support another art is really kind of the antithesis of what I do. So.
Well, what's interesting, I was going to ask that question too. Clearly says in your bio that you orchestrated. What's your relationship with the composer? How does that work? You
know, I've been working with one team for the past 15, 16 years. First movie we did was called Perfume, Story of a Murderer, which kind of died here. but in Europe it's huge. Like people love this movie. And then we did a lot of these other big. Cloud Atlas was another one, and the last one we did was called Matrix Resurrection. Of course, everybody heard of that. But it's really, I'm not on Hollywood. I'm not trying to be orchestrator for hire or whatever. I'm really just working with this one team, and the two composers that work here is Johnny Klimek and Tom Tickwer, who's also the director for Babylon Berlin, is another TV series that we do that are orchestrated. And they're really good at what they do. They know how to write music that's catchy and interesting and supports the film. And for me, they just asked me to, well, first they asked me to orchestrate it, to make nice colors and textures and all that stuff, and also just to make it a little more, a little of me. They just want a little of me. They don't want too much of me.
Right.
Then it won't be movie music. But these two guys that I work with, we just happen to now be very good friends, and so that's really our relationship. I think if I was just hired by some composer from Hollywood, I don't know, might be a problem, because I don't really work that well with others.
I really want to just understand the process, because I thought it was fascinating when you said that you orchestrated it. So do they like give you theme, or
well, look, there's no one answer.
And they say you orchestrate it.
It depends. Sometimes it'll be like, very little material, some MIDI piano, and I'll orchestrate and go crazy. And they say, Gene, go crazy. Sometimes it's a whole Logic session with they already had somebody layer everything on, and it's kind of orchestrated, but then I'll make it work for a real orchestra and make it better a little than what you could do with samples and electronic stuff.
Sure.
Sometimes it'll just be like an electronic, like weird, and I'll transcribe like a synthesizer and create that orchestra. It could be, it's many different things. It's many different layers. So there's never one thing. It's not. Back in the day, somebody would write a piano score and they'd give it to the orchestrator, and he would orchestrate it, right? That's kind of like John Williams-y type of thing. John Williams, I think, put in like clarinets. He actually orchestrated in his piano score a little, and they just gave the orchestra to flash it out. But this is a little different process. And sometimes they'll have like, this section we don't have much. Can you just add stuff? So it's like, okay, now it's extra than orchestrator plus additional music, this type of thing. So,
all right.
But in the end, they're the ones scoring. They're the ones putting the music under the movie, and people running and people talking, whatever.
Right.
So I don't do it. That's really movie scoring. The rest is, we write music together. It is a team process, and it's nice. I like it.
All right.
But it's not something I do for my own music in general.
Got it.
With these cats, I enjoy doing it. So
All right.
It's fun.
That's interesting. Appreciate that.